warm welcome from me. I'm Helen Martin. For those of you who don't know me, I'm hoping that most people do now in the network. But I'm one of the directors of the Gateway Alliance. As I say, it's lovely to see so many of you this afternoon, and thank you for being here. We know how difficult it is in schools and at home supporting the remote learning and the work that you're doing at the moment. So we really appreciate your time. Please do, as I say, keep your cameras on if you're able to, but your microphones off, so that eliminates any background noise. You will be using the chat. Lots of people have been putting things on the chat at the moment as well, so please do have a go at that to communicate. You can share your views, questions, comments as we go through the session. Charlotte and Farrah, who I'll introduce in just a second, will be keeping an eye on that, or I'll be keeping an eye on that, and be able to flag up to them if there's things there. So obviously colleagues will know that we were hoping very much to come together face-to-face for our English conference, which would have been a full-day event with our colleagues from CLPE. And sadly, we've not been able to do that because of the restrictions at the moment, as I'm sure you can understand. So next best thing, we've invited Charlotte and Farrah to come and talk to us through this webinar and another session that we'll run in the summer term, as well as a follow-up, which will hopefully give us the input that we were going to get through the face-to-face session. Ruth's also here, Ruth Baker-Leask, you'll know, who's our network leader. So thank you for being with us this afternoon, Ruth, and she'll be listening in like everybody else, and hopefully we'll be able to take some of the key messages from today into some of the sessions that we work with you on as we move through the year as well. I think we've got another session coming up after half term where we'll be able to reflect on what we've heard today. I'm going to say no more because I know that there is a lot to cover, and I'm really delighted that Charlotte and Farrah from CLPE can be here with us. They've got a huge amount of experience supporting subject leaders and supporting schools in terms of literacy, and a lot to share with us this afternoon, particularly looking at some of the research that CLPE have conducted in terms of reflecting realities and picture books. So I'm going to say no more. I'm going to hand over to our colleagues, and thank you for being with us today, Charlotte and Farrah. Over to you.
Brilliant. Thank you so much, Helen. Good afternoon, everyone, and welcome. And thank you, Helen, Ruth, and the Gateway Alliance for inviting us to be here with you all today. And thank you all for taking the time to join us for this CLPE webinar during what we know and we appreciate is a really difficult time in schools. So we really appreciate you all taking the time out to be here. So welcome. As Helen said there, my name is Farrah, and along with my colleague Charlotte, I form part of the teaching team at the centre, and together we work on the CPD programme and research strand of our work, developing a programme that best meets the needs of schools around the country and beyond in terms of developing best practice in all aspects of literacy in the primary setting. Over the next 2 hours or so, we're going to be drawing on our most recently published pieces of research to reflect on the role of literature in shaping children's sense of self and reader identity, as well as considering the value of picture books in nurturing children's development as literate individuals. Now, I can see from the chat function that you guys are already Zoom aficionados, so I won't spend too much time on housekeeping, but just so that we're all good, just to make sure that you should be viewing the housekeeping slide in full on the screen at the moment. You should also be able to see our faces in some corner of your screen. You should also be able to hear us. If you're having any difficulty either hearing or seeing what you should be hearing and seeing, please do let us know via the chat function so that we can make sure that you're accessing all of the information as we go along. We'll be pausing at key points in the session to invite you to either interact in an activity or to invite your thoughts on a particular point, and we'll encourage you to either use the chat function for that purpose or to unmute yourselves at that point, and we can have a conversation in that regard. But any issues, please do just jot anything down in the chat function so that we know that we've got you with us. So for those of you who are familiar with our work, you'll know that we're an independent charity that's worked with primary schools around the country and beyond, supporting them to develop best practice in all aspects of literacy teaching. And we've been doing this now for almost 50 years. When we're not talking to people through screens, as we've become quite accustomed in the last year or so, we're normally based in our centre in Southwark in London, which is an old school building, and the centre of that building, which is what you're viewing at the moment on the screen. and that would have been the old school hall and is now converted into quite an extensive children's reference library, and it houses over 23,000 titles from early years through to the beginnings of Key Stage 3, as well as an extensive archive traditional tales collection and an archive poetry collection. Is central to the building because literature is central to everything we do. It's central to our professional development program, it's central to our extensive online suite of resources, and it's central to our approach in terms of advocating best kind of engagement with quality literature. And this is because through our work in the last 5 decades or so, it's very evident to us the transformative power and benefit that literature and quality literature can have in supporting children along their journey to becoming literate individuals. You might also know us from our various programs and resources, and on the screen there you can see a range of what you'll find when you come onto the online part of our offer. And you've got an extensive range of videos, teaching materials, research materials that all form the basis of our online offer there, and are freely accessible to schools. Today we're going to be zooming in on the bottom part of that screen and thinking about the work that we've been doing specifically around picture books, and we've got a whole strand of the site exclusively dedicated to that work, featuring an extensive suite of video, author illustrated videos with authors talking about their process, reading aloud texts, as well as complementary teaching materials to really kind of unpack what this would look like in the classroom. So definitely a really useful, freely available tool for teachers that we're going to be touching on as we move through the session together. Now, throughout the last 5 decades or so, we focus very much on developing a research base, working alongside schools to contemplate what constitutes best practice. And in doing that, we produced a number of publications that distill that learning for teachers who haven't been able to participate directly in those research programs. The most recent publication, I would say, is the title that you can see in the top corner there, which is a book that we published, I think last February, so it's just about a year old now, and that embodies essentially our approach to the teaching of literacy in the primary setting, and addresses all of the aspects of what we're talking about today. So there's a designated chapter around reflecting realities, there's a specific chapter around picture books, but also more widely, it drills down into all aspects of literacy teaching and explores the best way to cultivate a rich reading and writing community and culture in your classrooms. But the other aspect and the core aspect that we're going to be talking about today are the 2 publications that you can see on the bottom of the screen there, the Reflecting Realities report and the Power of Pictures interim report. And so those are going to be the kind of core focus of today's session. Now, when we're working with schools, we have a year-round professional development program that's informed and shaped by the learning that arises from working alongside our colleagues in the classroom. It's made up of short day courses as well as year-round courses. And that professional development program is shaped and refined by what we learn by working alongside our colleagues. It also gives us the opportunity to identify areas of research that we might want to drill down more deeply, that we feel would be pertinent to the profession or pertinent to supporting pupils as they grow as individuals, both academically and in terms of their personal social well-being as well. And so that cycle allows us to constantly refine the approaches and the practice that we're advocating in that training. And so today you're going to kind of get the highlights of 2 strands, like I say, that kind of unpick what we've learned to date around the value of using picture books in the classroom and the value and the importance of using inclusive quality literature, and also considerations around what that constitutes, because in one respect it's very easy to say yes, it's important, but we need to unpick why it's important and then what that looks like in practice. So that's what we're going to be thinking about over the course of this session. Now, as I said before, throughout the session, we're going to have moments where we pause for thought, where we'll encourage you to either use the chat function or unmute yourselves to share your reflections when prompted to do so. So to help warm us up, I want us to take a moment to kind of set the kind of tone for the session. And I want you to think about the first thing that comes to mind when you see the following opening sentence come up on the screen. So I read because I want you to consider what's the first thing that comes to mind when you see that opening sentence. How do you complete that sentence? So either via the chat function or by unmuting yourself, just contribute and let us know, why do you as an individual read? Let's have a look at what we're saying in the chat. We read because we find it relaxing. It allows us to have a bit of escapism, which is much needed at the minute. We read because we enjoy it. We read because it transports us to another space and place. We read because it lets us switch off. Absolutely. Like to get lost. Brilliant. Escaping the everyday. Again, much needed at the moment. To broaden our knowledge base, to learn something, to relax, to switch off again. Me time, something that is a gift to myself. Lovely. Insight into different cultures, different ways of living. So stepping outside of my own world and stepping into others. Lovely. Because I love to learn, because I'm keen to learn. I enjoy learning. Brilliant. That's fantastic. There's a really lovely initial set of responses there. Really great, and a real consistency. It's really interesting, particularly more now than ever. Escapism is something that we're all, I think, kind of thirsting for and have an appetite for. But lovely, thank you so much. Now, what I want us to contemplate is what that then tells us about us as a group of readers. What does that tell us as the ways in which we responded there? What does that suggest to us about us as individual readers, but also us as a group of readers? So again, just in the chat, just to get a sense of what do those responses, the enjoyment, the relaxation, the escapism, the wanting to learn, what does it suggest? Yeah, brilliant. It suggests that we are already readers, we're competent, we're capable, we're literate, that we want to be somewhere else. Yeah, that there's a yearning for seeking out new spaces and places, that it's integral for our mental health, because so many of us have said we use it as a means of relaxing, of switching off, of escaping, that we care about other people, we're interested in learning about others. Yeah, that we're confident, that we're competent, and also importantly there, we have access to books. Brilliant. Yeah, we know how, we know where to find the material, and we value it. A number of you said we value it. Brilliant. And we have a positive association. Again, that's really key. Brilliant. Absolutely. Thank you so much for those contributions. So again, it gives us a really strong sense of us as, what is the collective noun for a group of readers? I need to I'll look that up. But yeah, so us as a group of readers, it's very clear and evident. We appreciate what it can do for us. We appreciate the value it can bring, and we're very competent and confident, and we have the access. Absolutely. So now I want you to think about, if you were to pose that opening question to the children that you work with, what do you imagine their likely responses might be? So again, just jot down in the chat if that's easiest. What do we think their likely responses? Yep. So for some of them, there'll be an appreciation that it helps us along our path towards learning. For a good number of us, because we're directed to, because we're told to, by the influential adult in our life, be they the person at the front of the classroom or the guardian or the parent at home. We're either being told to, encouraged to, or made to. And so we may not fully appreciate necessarily the full scope of what reading can afford us in the way that we as adults, accomplished adults, do. And that's something that's really kind of pertinent to linger on as practitioners, because we're at the other end of that process. We know the multiple benefits that it might bring. Yes, some great contributions there in terms of knowing the value of reading, in terms of absorbing language and then being able to own that language and manipulate it for our own means. Absolutely that. So in talk context, we appreciate it. But as adults, we are on the, like I say, at the other end of that continuum. We totally appreciate the full range of value that reading can afford us. Our children are at the formative stages of that journey and are at varying stages of confidence and competency along that journey. And it's quite a long and winding road, and you have to have quite a bit of resilience to keep with it, to stay with it. So our job as educators often is striking that balance between the skill and the will, giving them the skill and equipping them to be able to do it, but then also sustaining them in a way that makes them feel invested enough to keep with that journey, because it's going to be worth it in the interim, but also definitely in the end. So that's kind of what we're toying with as educators all of the time, in terms of striking that balance. Because at its very core, the act of reading provides an invaluable roadmap to the multi-layered ways in which language works and can be expressed. It gives us that blueprint and is really integral, particularly for our children growing as literate individuals. In the broadest sense, reading creates opportunities to learn more about ourselves, the world around us, and our place in it, as well as transporting us to worlds beyond our imagination, in very much the way that a lot of you've said, that you read for escapism, you read to switch off, you read to go somewhere else beyond your living room or beyond wherever it is that you might read. In a report published by the National Literacy Trust in 2018, a direct correlation was made between literacy and life expectancy, which in some cases it was suggested could result in a reduced life expectancy of more than 2 decades. So through our efforts as educators to establish solid literacy foundations for our pupils, we're not just helping children along an academic path, but we're literally transforming and saving lives. And that's quite profound when you think about how challenging particularly things are for us as educators at the moment. It's quite profound to think that the things that we do right now, we may not necessarily see the long-term benefit, particularly working as primary practitioners, but we are literally transforming lives by sowing those seeds of literacy in children as young as we do. So in 2015, you may recall, I mean, yesterday feels like a million years ago at the current moment, but 2015 feels like some time ago now. But you'll recall that nationally we were at a point in which for over a decade, the term reading for pleasure had become a very ingrained phrase within the English education landscape. There's an extensive body of literature that highlights the value of reading for pleasure. And in 2015, the UK Reading Agency conducted a literature review that summarised the key insights. What I was struck by at this point in time was how little the discourse around representation and inclusivity had filtered into reflections on reading for pleasure. If we know it's important to read because of the multiple benefits reading can bring, why did these reports not sufficiently reflect on the value of connecting to what we read, or explore the impact of underrepresentation or erasure on reader identity of marginalised pupils? As you'll know, the Reading for Pleasure agenda influenced the review of the English curriculum and became enshrined by the statutory document published in 2014. So there's no disputing that books are a valued and important part of the primary provision. What I think is interesting to consider is how this might be interpreted, how it shapes practice, and what impact that might have for our young readers. So you look at that programme of study on the next slide, and you'll see that books are mentioned over 71 times in what is an 88-page document. So we know it's an integral part of the provision. So it's thinking about, okay, if that's given as read, what are the implications for that in terms of our practice? Now, the term reflecting realities was inspired by the work of Dr. Rudine Sims Bishop. In pondering the analogy of books having the scope to serve as mirrors, windows, and sliding doors for readers, I wondered what the child and all marginalised adults had lost by not having their reality reflected in the pages of the books they grew up with. I also wondered, how do we begin to even comprehend the impact of invisibility for some and damaging representations for others? My sense is that if in our formative years we're not seeing our realities reflected in the world around us, or only seeing problematic representations mirrored back at us, that this can be tremendously damaging. We're living and working in particularly challenging and toxic times, particularly given the legitimisation of racist rhetoric by figureheads both past and present. As educators, we're not just tasked with teaching children to read and write, but we also have a responsibility to nurture our children, to have the resilience to navigate the world they will inherit. And I say past, but literally 2 minutes ago. Now, looking at this screen here, it's worth reflecting on how some of the significant moments that have dominated national conversation in the last 5 years will have filtered through to the pupils we work with, and how these will have shaped thoughts and feelings. We know that the ongoing discourse around the refugee crisis has been particularly toxic. We know that, and that was kind of the tipping point of that was in 2015, the young child Ayaan Kurdi, 3-year-old's body being washed up on the Mediterranean coast, and the kind of the way in which that, you know, that idea of we're overcome by immigrants was very much ingrained part of the UKIP campaign, that also then informed and influenced the Brexit campaign, which in 2016 led to a very divisive and toxic campaign that we're still kind of living the ramifications of to this day. And that gave rise to debates around Britishness and sovereignty and what it means to be British. And then in 2017, we had Meghan Markle's engagement to Prince Harry being announced. And initially, many viewed that as indicative of how progressive the establishment and by extension the UK was when it came to race relations. But we all know how challenging that has been for them. And we all know how that's turned out in terms of the long term. In 2018, we had the Windrush scandal, which, as we know, was a British political scandal concerning people who were wrongly detained, denied legal rights, threatened with deportation, and in at least 83 cases, wrongly deported from the UK by the Home Office. And then last year, in 2020, we had protests around the world as part of the Black Lives Matter movement, sparking national and international dialogue about ongoing gross injustices that are rooted in systemic inequities. Now, when you look at it on the screen like that, it just blows your mind in terms of so much happening in such a concentrated period. And this chain of events was followed by a series of publications that contributed to the discourse around navigating hostile environments, a term coined by our current government as something they wanted to encourage. These titles also complemented revived calls for better representation and inclusivity across industries. Now that's really, really crucial. But what was interesting is the way that this didn't seem to be filtering through. This same discourse that we were having in this domain just was not filtering through into the world of children's publishing, and it wasn't filtering through into our discourse around educational practices. And it's definitely something that I would say in the last 18 months or so has evolved in those domains. But initially, around the period of 2015, that just wasn't bridging over into those spaces. Now, like I say, despite all of this kind of political upheaval, despite all of this mainstream discourse around race and identity, it wasn't really filtering through into the world of children's literature in quite the same extent. Now, again, 5 years ago, the graphic on the screen was circulating across children's literary circles. It's a pictorial distillation of the annual findings of the Cooperative Children's Book Center at the University of Wisconsin-Madison. As some of you may know, the CCBC has been producing an annual survey that shares insights into the extent of presence of characters of color in children's books published in the US, as well as noting the ethnic makeup of the creators of these books over 30 years. What the graphic starkly highlights is that young readers are more likely to encounter a book about a truck or a rabbit than they are to read a book with a protagonist of color. Now, that was deemed as quite shocking at the time, but what was interesting is that although across the states this blew up as a really kind of controversial infographic, and it went viral, and it sparked lots of conversation, in the UK, the publishing industry were kind of a bit tumbleweed-like about it. Such debates were either not on our radar in the UK, or if they were seen as a problem specific to the US. The extent of this kind of tumbleweed energy was very serious, in that many in the industry were suffering from a case of not knowing what they didn't know. There was an unspoken presumption that racism is the specialism of our brethren across the pond and not an issue in the UK. And in order to kind of qualify that, you'd have instances of people saying, well, it can't possibly be an issue because we've just had a Black laureate. But Mary Blackman, who is truly a brilliant champion of children's literature, was and continues to be the only Black laureate out of 11. And she was the first and only to date. And so to kind of, qualify, we don't have an issue with this one instance, it is, I think, highly problematic and quite reductive. Again, in 2015, the Amazing Grace series was celebrating its 25-year anniversary. So again, this was cited as another reason why this isn't an issue for us. And it's testament to the fact that, you know, UK publishing industry can't be compared to the US industry. But if you pressed people at the time to name a book published in the UK featuring a character of colour beyond Grace, they probably would have struggled to find very much else to put on the shelf or to share. So two key anecdotes offered by Verna Wilkins and Darren Chetty, 30 years apart, for me laid bare the heart of the issue. Tamarind Books was founded by Verna Wilkins in 1987 after her 5-year-old son came home from school with a "This Is Me" kind of booklet in which he had coloured himself in pink. When she offered him a brown crayon to use instead, he refused, saying that the image he had drawn of himself had to be have pink skin because it was for a book. When she researched the matter further, she arrived at the conclusion that her child and other children from ethnic minority backgrounds were so underrepresented in children's books that they were being denied an important need in their learning. So she decided to start publishing books to meet that need. In his essay for The Good Immigrant, published 30 years later, Darren Chetty reflected on how challenging the children in his multicultural cast of children in East London found it to incorporate protagonists of colour in their stories, because books were understood to be the exclusive domain of white characters, so they couldn't imagine outside of that domain. Both experiences would suggest that despite concerted efforts by advocates, activists, librarians, teachers, independent publishers, booksellers and parents, the UK's publishing landscape was not as diverse as it believed itself to be. This is why books have a crucial role to play in helping to affirm young readers' sense of self, broaden their outlook, inspire them, entertain them and quench the thirst of their curiosity. Coming back to Verna and Darren, it's useful to consider why two almost identical accounts of children's impressions of who is entitled to occupy the literary space are the same despite being 30 years apart. Verna's son and the children in Darren's class were both in the primary phase of their education within the British schooling system. We've identified on the screen there some of the obstacles that arise in terms of accessing quality, inclusive literature. Our work as educators involves us not only identifying, but also eliminating the barriers to learning, the barriers that arise and the barriers that we contribute to. So I'm going to take a moment to kind of unpack some of these before we move into thinking about picture books specifically. Limiting factors that restrict access mean that as educators, we have a greater responsibility as curators to ensure access to a breadth and range of books. We're in essence taking on the role of the librarian, the bookseller and book whisperer. And this is why our recommendations need to be considered. And this is something that we really seek to emphasize through this work. It's not just about ensuring access and just purchasing a large stock of books. It's about thinking about what's inside the pages of those books and thinking about whether or not those titles are of a high enough quality in terms of the way that they are inclusive and representative to allow them to be part of that shelf and for you as educators to be endorsing them in your classrooms. So to do this and to take on that role of curator, we need to know our children, we need to understand their needs, and we need to be aware of their interests. We need to know what's available on the market by keeping abreast of the range of titles published every year and appreciate what these are, which of these are of good enough quality to share. We need to know how best to utilize a book. Does it have enough substance to form the basis of a unit of study? Is it pacey enough, rich enough in dialogue, and have enough opportunity to build suspense for it to qualify as a whole class read aloud? And to extend on Teresa Kremen's important guidance here, we need to know how to recognize whether or not it is a quality, inclusive, representative title. So the English National Curriculum, as we all know, sets out an expectation that children be exposed to a range and breadth of literature referencing contemporary and classic poetry, key stories, fairy stories, traditional tales and non-fiction. It's then up to us as teachers to determine those book choices. So take a moment to look at the screen there and consider the typical titles that children will encounter as they move through Key Stage 1. What you'll see is a lovely selection of books that could be drawn on to fit the bill. But now I want you to look at it again, but this time through a minoritized lens. Take a moment to consider, where are the characters of colour? So just kind of take a glance across those titles there and consider whether or not you can see any characters of colour. If you can't, aside maybe from the token child on the front of the Alan Alberg title, Please Mrs. Butler, that's because there aren't any in this sample. And it's important to consider what their absence might suggest to young readers and what they might infer or assume by this lack of presence. Now, if we take that approach again, move into Key Stage 2 and think about the types of titles that will be drawn upon to fulfill the national curriculum kind of categories in terms of the English curriculum, but also in terms of what we're seeking to do when we are formulating our wider curriculum. And again, as in the case with the Key Stage 1 sample, take a moment to consider these through a minoritized lens. Where are the characters of colour? Just have a scan across those titles and see if you can spot any characters of colour. What you might know is that we might see some signs of minority presence, but this is often located in the past through the study of ancient civilizations, as you might see with the ancient Greek title there, or in the traditional tales section, as you can see there from books from other cultures and traditions. This makes it easy to see why children like those in Darren's class may find it challenging to imagine characters of colour as leads in their own story writing. The books we choose to share, recommend, stock and integrate into our curriculum convey to our pupils what is valid and valued in the literacy space. If this can mean that children can potentially go through the entire primary phase of their education and at worst not encounter books that are written by authors of colour or feature characters of colour, and at best only encounter them in genres that render them relics of the past or othered as wise sages with little relatability or relevance to contemporary times. You can see the challenge that this strikes for us. Oops. For some children in the English schooling system, their first encounter of children of characters of colour, will be in high school, and depending on the text choices, the portrayals may predominantly frame these characters as exclusively experiencing strife, struggle, or subjugation. If the authorship and content of the school reading diet is predominantly or exclusively white, then this relays and reinforces false hierarchies that can potentially diminish the self-worth of minoritized pupils and provide a skewed impression of the wealth of literary greatness that spans across the breadth of cultures and communities that make up our classrooms and indeed our world. So I want you to take a moment now with all of that in mind to this is just for you don't need to put this in the chat necessarily, just on a scrap of paper, jot down some of the titles of texts you might have shared in the last term or so, be it through literacy units or through guided reading or through class read alouds. Just jot down a few titles just to kind of any titles you recall that come to mind. And if your notes show a good balance of breadth and range of quality of representation, then that's great. If they don't, I wouldn't beat yourself up about it necessarily. I want us to just take the time in this session and beyond to consider how we play with the scope we have in terms of the curriculum expectations and the possibilities that a steadily growing market of quality representative titles provides. Because the key thing that I'll go on to talk about now is our research findings, which highlight the extent of how challenging it can be to source them. So just keep that list to yourself, but do bear in mind that consideration moving forward. So over 5 years ago, at the very same point at which that infographic was circulating, and at the same point where we were beginning to have wider debates around race and identity, we sought funding to allow us to conduct this research. We met and spoke with representatives from across publishing houses, large and small, to explain our intention, the aims of the work, and to encourage them to participate by submitting every title that they had published in year that fulfilled the criteria. The criteria being any title specifically aimed at a 3 to 11 readership that featured any degree of ethnic minority presence. We devised an analysis framework that would enable us to review each title to determine the extent and quality of this presence. And funding permitting, we committed to do this year on year. So we've now produced 3 years worth of reports, last November being the third report, which not only speaks to the output of that particular cycle, but summarizes the trend across that 3-year data set. So you can see these on the next screen. For each report, we wanted to spotlight and celebrate a UK illustrator of colour by integrating their artwork into the design of the report. So we have 3 reports there. The first, we were very grateful to Holly Sterling, whose joyful, playful and uplifting drawings adorn many a picture book for young readers. In the second year, we had the privilege of drawing on the work of Lucy Farfort, who is a promising young talent whose debut book was published in the autumn term of last year. And for the third report, published in November, like I say, we were honoured to draw on the work of author, illustrator and publisher Ken Wilson-Max, who's a long-standing and valued member of the children's literature community. So I'm going to spend some time now just sharing some of those key highlights of the reports to give you a flavour of some of the challenges posed from the publisher perspective, but also from our perspective as consumers of this literature. So we were really keen when doing this to not just produce numbers and data, but also to produce qualitative analysis that would allow us to be more critically reflective around the production of books, but also our consumption of those books. Now, because this is a very short session, we're just going to touch on a couple of these things. We're going to think about presence, casting, characterization, and themes. So our reflections regarding settings provide a useful basis to support considerations about the presence of minority ethnic characters in the books we share with young readers. So when you are thinking about presence, the question on the next slide gives you the opportunity to contemplate what quality presence might look like. How and in what way are characters from minority ethnic backgrounds present in the books that we are sharing with our young readers? The benefit of having data sets is that it enables us to draw out trends and patterns across submissions. What we're able to do in the second report is draw out some of the patterns and common instances in which the presence of characters was being diminished and create a lexicon to articulate and challenge such erasure. So on the screen, you can see the language that we developed around this. And just to kind of give you a flavour of some examples of what this looks like in practice, I'm going to share 2 examples with you. So the first example of erasure that we observed is what we call cover short change. This is where the cover promises the presence of a character of colour, only for that character to disappear in the first few chapters or even pages of the book, a bit like the common trope in horror films where the one black character is the first character to be killed off. There was a time in publishing where the titles that you can see on the screen were bold, were pioneering, and will have been fought for because writers, authors, illustrators were told black characters do not sell and black characters on front covers will not sell. So there was a real resistance to that, and even more so within the content of the books as well. The Billy and Bell title there that you can see, which was published in '92, is a really lovely picture book about a young family expecting third child along the way. And there's a spread in that book that almost didn't make the cut because it was of the couple waking up in bed, and that was seen to be controversial or problematic. So we've come quite some way since then, and what we have now is the reverse. We have instances where publishers are clambering to put black characters on the front cover because they want to be seen as responding to the situation and the debate and the discourse that we're having at the moment. But what this leads to is, if we just press again, what this leads to is some short-term kind of quick fixes and ill-thought-out quick fixes, such as the Barnes & Noble debacle. Now, Barnes & Noble republished a series of classics, didn't alter anything about the content of those classics, but just put brown and black faces on the front cover of those books. And that was met with quite an uproar and an outrage, because you can't just change the front cover without giving due regard to the insides of many of which of those books would be inherently and fundamentally racist because of the period in which they were written. So what we're keen to do when we're working with schools and with teachers is to encourage them to get to know the book. It's not in your quest to kind of diversify your book stock. Don't just be grabbing any book that comes to hand that looks or gives the appearance of diversity, because sometimes the publishers haven't given it the kind of thought that needs to go into it to make it a truly inclusive and diverse title. On the next slide, we've got another example of erasure, which we coined the term short-term stay for. And it's a phrase we introduced which expands on cover short change, in that it refers to instances in which minority ethnic characters are introduced in the beginning of the book, but are either written out very quickly or never mentioned again in the text. In the most extreme case, in 2018 cycle of submissions, a character of colour disappeared as early as page 3 and failed to reappear thereafter. In terms of casting, we spent time reviewing the titles and considering where the different characters were located, whether or not the casts were equitable, and whether or not they had equitable agency. What we found in the third report was that over the course of the 3 years, 7% of children's books published in that 3-year period featured an ethnic minority character. So that's if you go to the next slide, Charlotte, please. Yeah, so that's 7% across the 3-year period, which and you can see the incremental increase there. So from 4% in the first year, 7% in 2018, and 10% in 2019. So those figures are quite stark, and you know, we're met with quite a lot of shock in the first instance because of how disproportionately low they were. But we are experiencing and encountering a year-on-year increase, which is quite a positive indicator. The analysis framework that we devised from the outset was designed also to allow us to not just quantify that presence, but evaluate the quality of the portrayals. We reviewed the makeup of cast, the position afforded the characters, and the extent of their agency. And each year, when reporting the number of main characters from an ethnic minority background, we've chosen to highlight the percentage of main characters and how that compares to the ethnic makeup of classrooms across England. This year, in the third cycle of doing this work, we found that only 5% of main characters were from minority ethnic backgrounds, compared to a pupil population of 33.5%. Now, we've seen an increase. It went from 1% in 2017 to 4% in 2018 to 5% in the most recent report, which is again positive. But when you look at that disparity between real world population versus book population, you can see there's quite a way to go. So from the outset, we've been keen to drill down to determine the extent of that representation. We're mindful that work in this area can sometimes fall short by clumping together heterogeneous communities of people under one banner. So we do drill down and look at different demographics and different communities within that, in order to illustrate the extent to which different communities of people are significantly underrepresented in that regard. And again, that's something worth considering in terms of your stock. If you're looking at your book stock in the classroom or in your school library, it may be that there's a disproportionate balance of, you may have a lot of presence, but it might be disproportionately kind of leaning towards one demographic versus another. And that might be something that will need to be contemplated. As well as casting, it's also useful to consider how minority ethnic characters are depicted. Along with the increase in the proportion of ethnic minority main characters compared to 2018, we observed that ethnic minority secondary characters were much better portrayed and much more well developed in the subsequent cycles. So these positive developments, again, although incremental and although steady and small, are moving in the right direction, and we are heartened by that. Now, what we sought to do, as well as illustrating the extent of the issue through the data, highlighting some of the instances of erasure so that, again, publishers could be mindful of that. We also sought to provide prompts in the last report, which provide a series of questions for publishers, but also for us as educators when developing our stock. I'm just going to take you through very briefly what those questions prompts are before we then lead into Charlotte showing you what we can do with those books once we've got the right stock. So when thinking about characterization of minority ethnic characters, we need to consider whether the characters in the book are thoughtfully developed, well fleshed out, multidimensional individuals. Ken Wilson Max, if you're an early years practitioner he should be a core feature of your book stock, because what he does in terms of observing the everyday and the details of the everyday and the essence of childhood is really powerful, and will makes for really high quality titles for early years and Key Stage 1 book corners. So that there is that consideration. The next consideration is thinking about authentic portrayals. When you look at Dape Adeola's attention to detail, you can see the ways in which he provides the reader with beautiful representations of everyday, genuine, intimate moments, as depicted in the example of the hairbrushing scene between mother and daughter in the award-winning title Look Up. The scene is a rare picture book example of an everyday relatable routine that's universal on the one hand, but nuanced enough through the use of props to make it distinctive to a young Black child's experience. So it provides a powerful, understated affirmation of young Black readers, but relatability for all other readers as well. And the outpouring of love for this character is testimony to the authentic and relatable depictions in the title. So anytime around World Book Day, if you go to his social media thread, you will just be blown away by the gloriousness that is the celebration of Rocket and the ways in which children have related to that character. It's vital that in our quest to ensure that children have access to a breadth and range of titles on their bookshelves, that we stock ample supplies of books featuring ethnic minority characters that are not defined by their ethnicity and in which ethnicity is not the key plot driver. So a book like Corinne Avares's My Pet Star is a beautiful example in that it shows that ethnic minority characters have license to go on the adventure of a lifetime or stay at home, or in this case, nurse a star. So it's having that range and spectrum of experiences conveyed through books as well. So that when we're reflecting on our book stock, we're contemplating whether or not we have a range of titles that mirror identities, but in which otherness is not the underpinning feature. So you've got a range there: going to the hairdresser, going for your checkup, being a scientist, going on an adventure. Having that range is really crucial to not reinforcing this idea of othering that potentially can arise when you think about that spread of titles that I shared with you a moment or two ago. So one thing you might find useful as an exercise after this session is to take a moment to lay out the book stock you do have available to you on a table, one genre at a time, and reflect on the balance of representation in each instance, asking yourself these key questions. Now we're going to turn our attention to the themes of titles we share with young readers as well, before we wrap up this segment of the session, and consider whether our book stock includes titles that explore a range of themes that are distinctive to the lived experiences of a range of minority ethnic groups. You'd have to be living under a rock to not be aware of the Black Lives Matter movement, and children from all backgrounds will to varying degrees have absorbed the range of discourse around race and identity in mainstream media. You will have seen that 5-year concentrated period, and we need to consider the ways in which children have been absorbing the toxicity of that discourse. And so in order to counter that toxicity, we need to be thinking about the range of titles that we provide our children access to. So titles that celebrate every child's uniqueness, such as the beautiful and playful and joyful early years title, Happy in Our Skin, that you can see there on the screen. Something that celebrates uniqueness, through to books that help us explore points of difference. This title, Sulwe, written by Lupita Nyong'o, illustrated by Vashti Harrison, is a really powerful picture book that explores the issue of colorism and the ways in which that can erode self-esteem and be challenging for the individual. Again, some significance there in terms of affording children relatability, but also affording children who can't relate to the experience and insight into the pain of that experience. Books like Kwame Alexandra's and Kadir Nelson's picture book, The Undefeated, which is an award-winning title that celebrates the complex, painful and inspiring history of the African-American community over time. It's a perfect embodiment of how to convey and explore social injustice in a way that honors the subject and doesn't patronize the young reader. So range is key. And as with the review of representation across genres, you might find it useful after this session to take a moment to lay out the stock and think about the balance of books that celebrate but also explore identity. Because again, you don't want a disproportionate tip towards issue-based titles over and above celebratory titles. So it's thinking about what that balance looks like and coming right back to the beginning of the session, thinking about that tipping point around access and considered recommendation. Because fundamentally our work as curators and as educators is to ensure that children have that access to a quality, a breadth and range of inclusive and representative titles. So I'm going to pause there and hand over to Charlotte, who is going to share with you what we then do. Because if you look at the titles on the screen there, that's 2020. So there's just some of the highlights of the representative and inclusive literature that was coming through. Because one of the upshots of this work is that it's made the publishing industry pay attention. And in paying attention, it's meant that we are seeing more and more titles coming through that are of a better quality, particularly if we compare what we were reading in the first cycle of this work versus what we were reviewing in the third cycle. And knowing now that there are books that we can draw on to this end, it's thinking about, okay, once we've got the stock right, once we've got the balance right, once we've got the breadth right, what do we then do with those books to best utilize them in the learning space?
Thanks, Farrah. So I'm going to talk about picture books, because picture books, in terms of reflecting realities, are the place where children can really see themselves reflected, not just in the words in the page, but also in the illustrations. Our other research project, The Power of Pictures, has looked at the breadth and use of picture books across the primary years. We've done this as part of an Education Endowment Foundation randomized control trial, and where we saw the gaps was in how they were used in upper primary. So our EEF trial focused on what we could gain from using picture books with older children. And what we found out is that they're an incredibly important genre to support the development of very sophisticated reading skills, but that as educators, we need to give children time, space, and lots of planned opportunities to develop their ideas through using picture books, but to also be able to draw and create their own picture books to extend their ideas for writing and to make their self-initiated writing richer. So just a quick bit of background on the project before we go into a more practical session where you're going to be involved in pulling out some things from picture books. The project was designed by ourselves at CLPE alongside the author illustrator Ed Veer. If you know Banana, if you know Mr. Big, that's Ed Veer who produced those books. And we've worked over the past 6 years with 10 author illustrators and nearly 250 teachers to put the project together. And as we say, it was designed to support some really fruitful links between authors and primary school teachers by developing a real shared understanding of why picture books are important, but also of picture book creation and the importance of illustration for children as a way of improving their engagement and raising their attainment in literacy. And as I said, we've just come out of the back of doing a randomized control trial about that, and we're hoping that research will be launched next year so that you can see the outcomes of that trial. But what the project really focuses on is developing children's creativity. We want children to learn from picture books. We want them to be involved in the act of creation and the act of being a writer. And what we drive them towards at the end of the project is to actually create their own self-initiated, self-authored picture book. So throughout the project, we're teaching children the skills of creativity, the capacity to imagine or conceive or express or make something that wasn't there before. And we're looking at the specific teaching approaches that cultivate creativity in young people. So what we're teaching children and teachers is how to become more visually literate and how we can read the pictures just as much, if not more so, than we read the words, the skills to analyze the messages that are communicated in text and images, and how we work creatively based on a model of how real writers and real creators work. What we really want to do is show children how to follow a really independent piece of work from ideation to publication. And there are lots of key experiences that are involved in this. The first is to make those picture books available, and that's across the primary curriculum, both as part of your plan provision and for free reading. There's a lot of shift change in the attitudes to picture books. We had one teacher, as you'll see later on, who said if I'd have seen a child read a picture book, I'd have said, put that down and read a proper book. We want to have that vision that picture books are just as stamina building and just as weighty as the longer novels. We're also focusing on the focused teaching of the language of picture books and the key skill of how to engage in that close reading of illustration, and giving time and space for children to independently engage in that reading and discussing of illustrations themselves. There's also some key activities that are going to support children in exploring how text and illustration work together to create meaning, but also opportunities for children to engage in illustration themselves, and activities that support their knowledge and understanding of narrative structure along the way, to lead them through into those planned opportunities to create their own narratives using words and pictures. And of course, at the heart of this has to lie that learning community that appreciates the value of picture books for all age groups. So we're going to look at what it means now to create that community of readers using picture books, and how we recognise the sophistication of picture books and the complexity of reading words and pictures to make meaning. This is all going to support that development of core literacy skills as well. Now, the problem we have is the messages that we're getting fed as teachers about what age appropriate texts are. I don't know if anyone has as much time on their hands as I do on a Sunday afternoon to look through all the guidance videos that are given to you by the DFE. The first ones you can see there were the first ones that came out when we looked at what an expected reader at the end of year 6 looks like. Now, if you watch that all the way through, you'll see there were novels, there was one collection of short story, there wasn't any poetry, there weren't any picture books, there weren't anything in terms of graphic novels, comics, newspapers, magazines. Fast forward to 2018, when we had the what does working at greater depth look like at the end of year 2? Well, working at the expected level, we moved from some really nice picture books. At the beyond level, we were looking at Roald Dahl, we were looking at Rudyard Kipling, and the pinnacle was Harry Potter and the Goblet of Fire for a 7-year-old. What does this tell us about what reading is valued? And how does that shape the reading that we provide for children in our classrooms? What is age appropriate? So we asked our teachers and we asked our children who picture books were for and why we have them in our collections. Now, we had some really great insights from the children themselves. These were all year 5 children. Lots of them knew that they were for all ages. They knew they could read any book, no matter how old they were. They knew the value as well. They knew that the pictures also had that role in describing what the story was about instead of using words, and how good they were for their imagination. They also knew about the importance of a breadth of reading. However, many more of our children, the vast majority of children surveyed, had views like this. They were for little children, children who find other books challenging. They saw them as the easy option. We had some quite dramatic views as well. I think they might be for disabled people who can't read, or toddlers and immigrants who need to learn English. What does that tell us about how picture books are valued and communicated in the home and classroom setting, if this is what our year 5 children are saying? What we need to make sure is that we're communicating that pictures and picture books are a really important part of that meaning-making process. And actually, that skill of reading pictures is just as complex, and even perhaps more complex, than reading print alone. We're using a dual system to draw the meaning there. And actually, as you can see, the research from Michaels and Walsh here says, actually, when those two symbolic systems work together in that way, our enjoyment, our stimulation is more than doubled. And in a world that's becoming increasingly more visual, we need to have those skills of that complex literacy genre, where both of our verbal and visual cues are structuring our meaning. Now, this is about the quality of books as well, because we know that those high quality illustrators are the people who use all aspects of visual imagery to convey meaning, and that the words are not there, the pictures are not just there to replicate what the words on the page are doing. They're adding an extra and more vital layer of meaning. So what we worked on with the teachers and children was, how do we empower children's talk by teaching them the language of picture books? We taught them things like what an illustration was, how it differed from the text, but we taught them about things like layout and end papers, what a spread was, how a single spread was different from a double page spread, what it meant when that spread was a full bleed, what it meant when it was broken into frames, and how framing works and what that does, and how authors also can break pictures down into vignettes, and the colour palettes that authors use and illustrators use, and how important they are. So we're going to learn also the tools of visual storytelling. We're going to learn how important composition is in telling us things about the story, the quality of lines and the patterns and the shapes and patterns that are used on the page, the importance of characters' facial expressions, their body language, their props. Every single detail adds a layer of meaning. We'll also look at what perspective and scale and visual links tell us, how colour, shading and tone is used, the journey that's created across a page, the effect of the page turn, the way the page is laid out, how it's framed, how things are separated on the page, and the interaction between the words and the pictures. We'll give you a handout pack with all of these terms in it with the slides that you can see here. But if you want to read any more about this, then we've got time to share with you in this short session. I can't recommend highly enough looking at Pictures in Picture Books by Jane Doonan. That will give you a really comprehensive guide for how to read pictures. But we're going to do this in practice now. And we're going to do this through a series of really good quality picture books that are not only fantastic picture books, but are that fantastic representations of the sort of quality that Farrah was talking about in the first part of this session. And the first one we're going to look at is If All the World Were by Joseph Coelho and Alison Colpoys. Now, please feel free at this point, you've listened to us for a long time, to unmute your microphones and chip in verbally if you want to, or you can answer in the chat. And I want you to think about this cover image that you can see here. What do you know, or what do you think you know about the characters or story from the cover image alone? And what is it about the image that gives you that impression? So either unmute your microphones and chip in, or type away in the chat. Thanks, Claire. I can see you've unmuted.
I have read the book before, but I'm going to pretend I haven't.
Thank you. You're playing the teacher game. Well done, Claire.
So I'm thinking perhaps grandfather and granddaughter as a relationship.
Brilliant. What gives you that rather than father and daughter?
I'm thinking grey, you've got greying hair, slightly bushy eyebrows. So just, I'm bringing knowledge of that sort of facial feature.
Excellent. Yep. And we got lots of people agreeing with you in the chat there. Mm-hmm. Nicola in the chat's talked about the closeness of the relationship. How do we know it's a close relationship? What is it that the illustrator has done, Alison Colpoys there, that tells us how close it is? Jane's talking about their gaze, the way that they're looking at each other. Look at that angle of the gaze. Nicola's come back with the way that they're looking at each other and the way that they're holding hands. Yeah. The facial expressions Francis has come in with as well. What's going on around them as well? So we've got the characters here. What else do we think we might know about the story from what's going on around them? Let's have a look at the scenery. Let's have a look at the props.
They're not in this country.
Oh, go on. Sorry, Lisa. Yes, go for it.
They're not in this country.
What makes you think that, Lisa?
The tiger.
The tiger?
In the background.
So seeing that tiger there and thinking it's not in this country, is there anywhere your mind is going, Lisa, from seeing that tiger? If you had to place it. Oh, sorry, Lisa, you're muted.
It could be India. It could be Africa.
Okay, so Lisa's got the world knowledge to draw that in. Where might a tiger be found in the world? Somebody said might be a jungle, looking at the tropical plants, flowers, animals. Leah said it might be an imaginary world because of the way the colours are so vivid and so bright. Frances thinking it's maybe the girl's imagination of what walking in a garden is like with her grandfather. Yep, Nicola confirming that as well. She hasn't read it, but it seems like they're lost in the granddaughter's imagination. being that close to a tiger. Oh, I like nice use of ellipsis, Nicola. Being that close to a tiger, ... Okay, let's see. So we're going to find out a little bit more about this character now. So this is the first title page. Now, it's really important when you're exploring a picture book that you don't flip forward to that first page where the text starts, because every choice before that page is something that is involved in the storytelling. So here we've got another layer of information about this girl character here. So let's think about her here. What more can we tell about the girl from this vignette that we see on the inside title page? And what does focusing in on her in this way, by cropping out everything else, we've got no more of that bright background, we've just got her on her own. What does focusing in on her in this way make us think about the story that might lie ahead? Again, feel free to unmute and just chip in or throw some things into the chat. So Alice thinks she's curious. Try and pin it down now. It used to be that age-old adage of the assessment focus: justify your responses with evidence from the text. Well, the illustration is evidence from the text as well, and that's still important. So if we're saying she's curious, what's telling us she's curious? James thinks she's going to be our guide through the story. I wonder why you think that, James. She enjoys books. She likes to imagine. She's gazing into the space in front of her. Thanks, Rebecca. Sorry, it wasn't Rebecca. Rebecca just jumped up in there. All the colours, Amy's saying, really interesting. She's looked at the colours in the girl's notebook, and all the colours link to the colours we've already seen on the front cover. When you're looking at picture books, it's really important to be able to flip forward and flip backwards and to make connections. Nadia's saying she uses her imagination. She's got a book. She has an inquisitive look. Claire's saying, really good. Claire's starting her sentence with maybe. This is a place of tentativeness. It hasn't got to be a right or a wrong answer. Maybe she's imagining the world she's come across in her book, and maybe that's what we saw on the front cover there. James is saying she may have been encouraged to daydream. I wonder who encouraged her to do that. So as we dive into the story, we've got another title page here. We're still not on the first text yet, but this is another layer here. Let's think, what more can we infer about the characters and their relationship from that little vignette that we see there? And have a look at even this. Before the publication details, we've got another image there. Why do you think that's been included? We've got a link to Nadia here. She may link this to a cultural heritage indicated by the pictures on the front. Okay, let's think about that. What do we think her cultural heritage might be? Leah, definitely. She loves drawing. We had it on the first page. Now we've got, she really loves it because we can see how much she sharpened those pencils. Jane wondering if her grandfather tells her things. She likes to listen. The sharpenings indicate her creativity as well. Hannah saying the granddad's pointing towards her. What does that mean? Is he giving her advice? And that reciprocity that Leah pulls out, it's not just, it's both of them. The grandfather's teaching her, showing her about the world, but she's coming back with that as well. The close relationship, he's telling her about something. They encourage each other and share their imaginative stories. Claire's saying perhaps the book contained her drawings. Is she creating the world her grandfather describes? Excellent. So we've got that closeness and that creativity. So we're going to start reading this picture book now. It starts, it's spring. I take long walks with my granddad. I hold his giant hand. He says, "You're too old to hold hands." We explore, hand in hand, the budding springtime. So have a think about that spread now. Have a think about the words that you see on the page and the words you've heard read and the pictures as well and how they work together. There's a break in that spread there. We've got a double page spread, but it's made up of two single spreads. The first one, we've got a full spread that covers the page. In the second spread, the illustrator's chosen to move from that full single spread to vignettes, cut out vignettes sharing some of their experiences. Why do you think the illustrator's done that? What impact does that have on you as a reader? Again, feel free to chip in on the chat or just to unmute your microphones. Yeah, brilliant. Sheila's just gone straight in. It's encouraging us to really look in detail like they're doing. Sophie saying it focuses our attention right on that bird's nest. Because Grandad's going like this, we're thinking, oh, what's he looking at? And we follow that journey up to the bird's nest that we're seeing. Leah, it's telling us that it could tell us that they spend a lot of time together. So instead of having one moment, we're broken up into a series of short moments. That suggests that there may be passing of time between each thing. Yeah. Okay. If we move to the next spread now. Oh, lovely, Claire, that journey that we see on the page as well. We're actually able to walk alongside them. Nadia's saying how vivid the memories are. Is there anything else we can tell about their relationship from this spread? Think about the words that we've heard, particularly. I'll just read them again. It's springtime. I take long walks with my granddad. I hold his giant hand. He says, "You're too old to hold hands." Yeah, that repetition of hand. Jane's picked up, hands used lots of times. We've got that repetition. It's very important for them. Nicola saying that granddad's a key focus. Oh, Sheila's picking up the technical words. Yep, picture books are great for teaching our language and grammar in context. We've got budding, too old. Now, not being a criticism there, as Sheila picks up, he's giving her the confidence to go out on her own. Claire picking up that the hands not only feature in the words, but also the pictures. There's a big focus on the gestures that they're doing with their hands. You might think about the adjective used as well. We've got that opposition between him wanting to let her go and giving her the confidence, and then her description being his giant hand. How does she feel compared to how he wants her to feel? There's a bit of juxtaposition there. Okay, if we look at the next spread. If all the world was springtime, I would replant my granddad's birthdays so that he would never get old. Now that's quite an impactful page turn. Let's do that again. We go from those two single spreads into a large, colourful double spread now. Have a think about the impact that that page turn has on you. Why do you think that might be? Where's your eye drawn to first? And then what are you taking in? Is there anything you notice about the perspective or the scale? Yeah, Leah's just said, it makes me think that the world is so much bigger. Look at her now. Look at the scale that's been used here. She's been quite big before on the page, and now she's absolutely tiny, and everything around her is really encompassing her in this small space. As Claire says, she's so small in this world. Sheila's looked at it from a different perspective. We're immersed in nature, the benefits the spring gives. There's that regrowth. Jane was first of all drawn to the butterflies, then the girl, and how small she looks. James picking out how she's the same size as the animals, and Hannah picking out how hard it is to see her at first. She's very much part of nature. The bright red and colourful clothes she wears, like the flowers. Yeah, James also picked up, why does she have her own space? And Francis has picked up, she's alone at this point. Is there anything that's making you think about the story? Laura's picking out the juxtaposition between the bright, happy colours in the picture and the almost sadness in the words. Where are we getting that almost sadness from? And Nadia picking up how when she's not with her granddad, the surroundings might feel so much bigger and the world might feel so much bigger. And Sheila's asking, where's grandfather now? And Alice saying that the girl might be lost without her grandfather. Zoe saying it's implying that granddad's already had a lot of birthdays. I'd replant my granddad's birthdays. Well, look at how many flowers are planted in that garden. Okay, let's have a look at how the story is going to continue from here. We might also think about, in this spread, those compositional choices, what they think about, make us think or feel about the girl, how it connects with the words in that way with the children. It's summer. Grandad buys me a racing track. It's second hand with missing bits. We fix what we can together. We use our hands to zoom the cars up and down, up and down, up, 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 and fire them off into deep space. Okay, think about that relationship again. Think about the words you've heard read. Think about the pictures that you can see. What more can we infer about their relationship from this spread here? We've got that mirroring. Rebecca's picked up on the mirroring of the body language, building on that idea of the closeness. Jane, again, we're back to the hands again, and Claire says the importance of the hands. Nadia's picked up they may not be very wealthy. What was it that suggested that to you, Nadia? And Sheila picking up they're not playing stereotypical girls games or doing girls things. We're doing a universal experience here. They really are each other's favourite people. They fix things, they make things right together. That united front, them helping each other, them holding the track down together. Nadia's come back, second hands and needs fixing, but they can do it together. Yeah. Nicola also talking about the challenge on stereotypes, which is really important as well. The special bond that's not shared with the other. That's interesting. Well done, Leah. That it's not the other family members in the background there aren't part of this. This is just for them. And they just want to be together. There's no interaction with those other adults on the page. And look at that swoosh of the track. It's almost like they're on a journey together, and they're together at every single stage of that journey. Okay, as we turn to the next spread. Again, the long track. Sorry, I'm just picking up on some. I'm trying not to leave everyone's comments behind. Hannah's saying previously we had the hint of sadness about Granddad's age, but he doesn't believe, or he doesn't seem to behave. He's so old. He's playing just like she is. So although he's old, he's young at heart with them. Yeah, think about, you've already picked up that body language. What do you notice about the body language? Every single movement is mirrored together. And there's also, yeah, Charlotte says, although they're not interacting, there's also obviously a close bond between whoever's in the background. Who might those characters be? They're chatting together. They've got the gaze. Everybody is enjoying that time together if it's not actually together. Okay, so here's our next spread. If all the world were deep space, I'd orbit my granddad like the moon, and our laughs would be shooting stars. So when we look at this spread, let's have a think about why now we're moving from the very real experiences down to a fantastical image, and have a think about what the words reveal about the girl's feeling towards her granddad. Why do we think we've gone from real to fantasy? Everything so far has been in the garden, on the beach. Well, that's a lovely phrase Rebecca's pulled out. It's like they're pulled together with an unseen force. Jane's come back to her imagination and how important her imagination is, but also that he's the center of her world. And Hannah saying not just the center of her world, the center of her universe. Yeah, Sheila picking up that the fantastical setting might be to show how creative she is, and that whenever she is in her mind or in real life, he's always with her. Nicola picking out how love is such a mystical thing. And yet Amy picking out the relationship's too big to be described by everyday occurrences. So she has to move to the fantastical in her imagination to be able to really pull out how big that is. Now, we've already touched on some grammatical choices already, and I want to focus on that a little bit further, because the judicious use of language in picture books allows us to really focus in fully on some of the language and grammar that authors choose and use as they compose a text, and us being able to really think about what those word choices mean. as teachers, it's really important we do that explicit modelling as talkers and writers, and in the choices we make of text that we're going to share with our pupils, and that we make those careful text choices to demonstrate a range of writing voices. Through that, your children are going to gain that implicit knowledge of language structures and writing voices, but also they'll gain that explicit knowledge of that quite complex terminology that we've got to grapple with in the grammar section of the national curriculum. But also we're showing them how to make really controlled choices in their talk and writing. So I'm going to show you the next spread, and in the next spread we're really going to focus on the grammar of the language that we see. It's autumn. My granddad makes me a notebook with handmade paper of brown and orange leaves that rustle when I turn the page, bound with ruby Indian leather string. Grandad gives me a pencil with a rainbow nib. Write and draw all your dreams. So I want you to think about first what the words allow us to infer about that gift that the girl's granddad has given her. So read the words back to yourself. What do the words judiciously chosen by Joseph Coelho as an author infer about that gift that the girl's granddad has given her? Think about, are there any words or phrases that might particularly stand out for you? James says he makes her a notebook, but we get the feeling, it's like that advert, this is not just any notebook, this is an M&S notebook, isn't it? What is special? Sophie's picked out the handmade paper. Charlotte's picked out the term ruby. We know that's a precious gem. Let's think about that whole phrase, ruby Indian leather string. Nadia's just picked out it's precious Indian string. Leah's picked up the cultural reference there. Is it something of his maybe that he's given it to her? And again, Sheila's saying she's noticing that detail. Has he described it in that way to her? Is that how he said it when he's handed it over? Ellie's saying it's thoughtful, it's handmade, it links back to his culture, links to the nature again, that like the flowers and the garden when they describe the pages that rustle like leaves. Claire picking up it's been crafted, back to the hands again and how important the hands are throughout this story. Jane saying she's looking out of the page onto the next part. What's happening next? Yeah, let's think about that now. If we think about her, look at how you see her here. In the first page, we've got that very tight vignette of Grandad giving her the gift. In the second half of the spread, although Grandad is mentioned in the first words, Grandad gives me a pencil with a rainbow nib. And it's his words that we see, write and draw all your dreams. The illustrator's made a really conscious choice not to include grandfather in that half of the spread. Why do you think that might have happened? What's it making you think here about the girl? Leah's saying maybe he's encouraging her to build a future without him. Sophie's saying it's back to encouraging that independence that he was trying to push her towards in that first thing about you're too old to hold hands. Sheila's saying it's an opportunity for her to reflect. She's now not with him, but she's recalling his advice and his instructions. Jane saying she's daydreaming. She's thinking of him in the future. Amy picking up on the way that it mimics the other spreads, you know, like with the cars, he made it and now she can use it. It's still a joint enjoyment, but Grandad's the narrator now and this is her activity. Claire's asking, where is he? It's like letting go of her hand. Yeah, brilliant. Now, we're doing this at a very, very fast pace here because we've only got a short session together. What you'll need to encourage is really, when you're looking at picture books with children in the classroom, that importance of multiple readings. In the first reading of a picture book, and you'll know this when you want to choose one for using with a group of pupils or for selecting for a focused bit of teaching, that first reading is all about, right, what's happening in the story. But actually in a picture book, that works against you because the pictures want you to stop and search. So when you do a first reading, just get a handle on what the book is and what's it about. Then take a second read to really stop and search those pictures, to really look at it and think about what the pictures are telling you. And by the third look, you want that time to read the words, to look at the pictures much more slowly, to then think about that process of discovering what relationship they have. And all of this has to be supported by a lot of opportunity for and time and space for children to be able to consider and respond to illustrations. Another book I'd heartily recommend is Mary Roche's Developing Children's Critical Thinking through Picture Books. What she says in there is the books we're looking for are those that don't give up their meaning or their secrets too easily. And by promoting that quality of discussion, we're encouraging our children to be curious, skeptical, engaged, and non-complacent. But that also you want to do that as a group, as a community of readers, because then they've got time to co-construct their knowledge, to bring shared experiences to the text and reach a shared understanding together. Now, when you do that, you can see a huge impact on the children, not just on their critical literacy skills, not just on their visual literacy skills and their powers of group discussion and interaction, but on their changed perceptions and opinions of picture books. And that has to start with the teachers as well. We had 2 teachers here on the project who reflected that before they were doing the project, they wouldn't have chosen to use a book like that with a year 5 class, but now they can see how much deep thinking it provides opportunities for. It allows you to teach inference, character development. It allows you to stop, search, and look at vocabulary. What they said was how accessible it was for all children and helping to build that confidence and independence of your less confident readers and writers. Again, the children coming together and thinking about what they can gain from picture books as well. Thinking about the children who were the most suspicious about picture books first, thinking they were for babies, but they were the children who were amongst the most insightful as they began to peel away those subtle, deeper layers of meaning. It's about giving time for deep discussion and the impact that then has on children's comprehension. You may spend just one lesson looking and really thoroughly unpicking 1 or 2 spreads from the book, and the rich discussions that can be recorded from that will be your evidence of what children know and can do. Now, post-course, this also had a massive impact on changing children's perceptions of picture books, knowing that they were for everyone, thinking that picture books can be read by everyone, and trying to show and tell people that they're not just for babies. Also, that link to say, actually, they help, the pictures that are on the page help us understand the emotion of the story. And this child called it the real story, not just the story from the text, but the real story, which goes much deeper. So we have a range of Power of Pictures texts, which are perfect ones to use across the whole school to build communities of readers. This is one that can be done on a number of different levels so that you can have children entering that at a very initial stage in the early years foundation stage. But by the time you get up to year 5 and 6, they're having much more nuanced and sophisticated discussions about the text, drawing in their much greater range of life experience. Now, what you'll also need to think about is how you build that spine of picture books across your school. How are you specifically choosing picture books that support that development of reading skills and strategies across the primary years? Now, when we're looking at our earliest readers, it's about developing that knowledge that print and illustration carry meaning. It's also about developing their language and vocabulary. It's those picture books that allow them to chime in with reading, that support one-to-one correspondence and develop their exposure to and recognition of high frequency words. Again, like we just did with the Joseph Coelho book, but at a much earlier level, think about where are the opportunities where we can contextualize the teaching of our phonics and grammar, putting the skills in to the actual act of reading. How do we develop children's knowledge of punctuation, and how do we build their knowledge of narrative conventions and structure? Now, Farrah already highlighted the incredible work of Ken Wilson Max. His picture books are absolutely perfect for your younger readers. As you look at Where's Lenny, you might think about the front cover first. You might think about where your attention is drawn to first and why you think this is. As you come to the inside title page, you might then think about, we've had a very big image of Lenny on the front cover. We've now gone a little bit like the girl in the Joseph Coelho book to a very small image. What does that big to small suggest? Does it change the way we think or feel about the character or the possible story? And if so, why? As we take a look at this first double page spread, we want to ask the children, what do we see and how do we feel as an observer? Now, if we look at this, we might be thinking of this as parents. There's a dad with their eyes closed. There's a baby running towards stairs. We might go into protective mode. We might think with the children, why has the author illustrator chosen that layout? Why has he separated dad and the baby, and whether they can pull that into their experience of having played hide and seek before. What's great about Ken's books is he really thinks about the kinds of language that is useful for early readers to encounter. Every single one of his books incorporates a rhyme or a song. So when you look carefully on the page, think about how it supports your early reading skills and your understanding of the story. So we're building that 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. Once I caught a fish alive, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10. Then I let it go again. Ready or not, here I come. Now, what we have to do is think about that's the time that Lenny has to hide, and Dad is keeping half an eye on him because his fingers are open there. So you might think then about how the images add to our understanding about each character. If you look at the placement of Lenny popping his head round the corner, what might that suggest about him? When we go into the story further, we get that repetition. So think about this spread. Where's Lenny? Daddy hears a rumbling in the cupboard. Aha, he says. But when he opens the door, he finds nothing. Now think about that mirroring that we saw in If All the World. We've got that mirroring here as well. Look at their arm shapes curving together. Look at the way they're tilted towards each other. What might we tell about the relationship between Lenny and his father? And as we see this one, we get, where's Lenny? Daddy sniffs and follows his nose to the living room. Aha, he says, but it's only Mummy eating toast. Again, we've got this journey here. Where is the journey on the page leading us? We go from Lenny to the toast, to Dad, to Mum, and right to the page turn. What might that make us think about how the story might continue? And again, keep thinking, how does the text specifically support that development of early language? We've got some really good language there. The sniffs, purposeful verb. He follows his nose to the living room. So we've got that expanded sentence. When we're working with our youngest children, we really want to work on them expanding from 2, 3 word phrases, simple utterances, into full sentences. And this book gives us a really good model for that. Now, you might think this is quite complex for children of our youngest age, but when you think about it, it's the discussion that you facilitate as an enabling adult, and knowing that teaching picture books and teaching children to use critical literacy skills and visual literacy skills in this way is expecting more of the children. Again, as this project teacher said, who worked with a year 1 class, they were eliciting deeper and more thought-provoking responses from the children. They were able to draw on the extra story depicted in the pictures. What it did was to create more talk and more ideas for writing. And again, what's fully played out across every year group that's been involved in the project is those children who are normally considered less able, they've been the ones to shine using those power of picture sequences. This year 1 teacher saying that all of the class are discussing illustrations with confidence and making references to authors, illustrators and techniques that they're using. If you can get that in year 1, recognizing authorial intent, but also the intent of the illustrator, think about where you'll be if you're in year 6 when you're trying to teach authorial intent at a greater depth level. There are a range of really good quality picture books to support early readers. And again, as Farrah said, look for that range and breadth. Look for, we're not saying don't use picture books that have got animal characters. We're saying consider your whole text. Have you got representation across the board? Have you got a variety of characters, a variety of situations, and really, really quality portrayals in the illustrations that you see? Can't recommend highly enough Tom Percival's books like Ruby's Worry. There's a really beautiful depiction in there. Another Ken Wilson Max book you've got there, Astro Girl, and Jabari Jumps. There's a new one in that series called Jabari Tries, but they are beautifully depicted illustrations that are of the highest quality. So when we move into the next stage and we're thinking about our developing readers, we want to move into that development of reading fluency and developing that comprehension much more beyond the literal. We're also really tuning into using language effectively to engage a reader. And what picture books are ideal for here, again, is that looking at language, grammar and punctuation in context. Also, as children move into developing as readers, we want to develop those skills of empathy. How are they connecting with characters? How are they relating characters' experiences to their own? And also, how are we developing their continued knowledge and understanding about narrative, including how to develop characters and settings and storylines of their own. So we'll do this one after seeing Where's Lenny as a bit more of a practical one. This is quite a complex image here. So I want you to think about, what do you know or think you know about this story from the cover image, and what gives you that impression? So feel free to unmute or feel free to pick up in the chat again. Maybe think about what strikes you first. Maybe think about where your eyes led after that. Jane thinks it's got a historical element. James thinks there might be a Jules Verne fan here, 20,000 Leagues Under the Sea. Sheila's talking about, we're definitely going into fantasy here, multiple parallel universes. It's the layering of the images on the cover. Yeah, we've got some things very definitely in the foreground, some things in the background. Jane saying now I've spotted the huge whale. It didn't strike me first. My eyes were taken somewhere else. James saying we've got a definite theme of exploration here. What's making us think that? Claire saying there's things in there that look familiar, but there's also a twist as well into the fantastical. Nicola saying the balloon struck her first, but then saw the whale, and that was strange because it was the biggest thing. Jodie's talking about we might be going to a mix of settings. Anything else we can tell when we look in more detail at some of the images? Lisa's looking at the compass, how the center of that illustration there. Yep, we've got a compass there. Lots of animal totems there. Look at the heads on the ships, the mast heads. Look at the shapes of the balloons and the baskets. Leah's saying, don't know whether it's day or night. There's definitely an nautical element. And Claire's talking about the above and the below. Brilliant. Okay, let's explore this one a little bit further now. So let's have a look at these end papers now. These are the end papers of this book. What can you see in the end papers? How does it connect with what you saw on the front cover? And do the images give you any more ideas as to what might be about to happen or what the story might be about? We've got that repetition of the whale. So the whale's obviously very important here, and that theme of animals and journeys. Jane saying it looks dreamy like a cloud. Nicola saying it looks a bit heavenly. Have we got a heavenly element here? James and Leah both talking about the cloud. James saying it's got quite a ghostly feeling. Leah thinking of that image of laying on your back and gazing up at the clouds. What are the shapes that you can see in the clouds, that game that we can play? James is making a text connection outside, the ocean spray linked with the Guinness advert. So let's look at the title page here. Now think about the gaze and where it's drawn to here. What do you notice about the perspective, the proportion in this scene? And what do you know or think you know about the characters? How might they fit in with your initial ideas about the story that you've already had? I can hear frantic typing. Do feel free to unmute if your fingers are getting sore. Leah's drawn to the horizon. What lies beyond? Yeah. Jodie's saying this is a picture showing us what the actual title means. This is the point where the ocean does meet the sky on the horizon. Cloud watching. Is it a holiday on the coast? Is it their home? Are they waiting for someone? Do we have any idea about what their relationship might be? Jane's saying they look tiny. They're also mirroring each other. So lots of picking up on that mirroring. Their mum and a child, mother and son. Is it his first time seeing the sea? We don't know yet. So this is about opening up that place of possibility. What you're doing in this slow unfolding of a text is leaving the reader, the child reader, to bring their own experiences to it. We haven't read any words of the story yet. There's no right and wrong answers at this point. There is just a myriad of possibilities. And what you want is for the children to be leading that. You want them to be able to be tentative, to be rough, to take risks, to think about what the possibilities could actually be. Okay, if we dip inside the story now, let's think about this one. Finn lived by the sea, and the sea lived by him. It's a good day for sailing, his grandfather would have said. Okay, have a think about that one. What do you think about the colour palette here? Why do you think we've changed from those blues and golds and whites into this kind of sepia tone with the red picked out? Have a think about the text and the illustration. What do you learn about the boy? And what do you learn about his relationship with the sea, but also with his grandfather? James wondering, what are those clouds hiding? Is he from a nautical family? What gives us that sense? Nicola's saying she thinks he's lost his grandfather. What tells us that, Nicola? Is it something you can see in the images? Is it something you can hear in the words? Claire's saying that the palette's quite bland compared to what we've seen before. Nicola's saying the past tense, his grandfather would have said. Yeah. Rebecca's looking at the windowsill. Is that a photo of his granddad? And if it is, what could we see in that photo? Alice saying admired his grandfather as the photograph is probably of him. The photo looks old. Is it his granddad's hat on the bed, or is that his hat? Are the coloured items, oh, that's interesting, James. Are the coloured items gifts from the granddad? Is that why they've been chosen to be picked out in red? Excellent. Was the grandfather a fisherman or a sailor? There's lots of memories there. Okay, let's see if we can tell any more from the next spread. Finn remembered Grandpa's voice, telling him stories about a place far away where ocean meets sky. Now, you might have had some of your answers from the questions you had on the previous spread answered here. Let's think about that text. If we really drill into the words on the page, think about that repetition. Would have, his grandfather would have been 90 years old today. What's the choice of would have and remembered suggest? How does it link with the illustration you can see here? And when you look at the illustration, what do you notice about the colour palette on both sides of this spread? Why might the illustrator have chosen to do black and white for that side, colour for this side? This is a great one for spending lots of time poring over. And again, you might want to give your children magnifying glasses or viewfinders to really look at the illustration on the left-hand side, on the right-hand side of the page. Nicola confirming the grandfather might be a fisherman or a sailor, lots of memories. The memory is in black and white on this page here. James picking out, when we do see the colour, it's very oceanic, the colour palette, the blues, the greens, the yellows of the sand. Nicola picking out that the colours, the real life, the empty chair, is that where the grandfather used to sit? Claire looking that some objects repeat in both images. What are the similarities in the images? What are the differences? This is the same place. Yep, Leah's saying the things have changed on the beach, showing the passing of time. Yep. The contrast between day and night in the pictures as well, Hannah's picked up. Fantastic. On the next spread, we see, to honour him, Finn built a boat fit for a long journey, one they had planned together. Now there's some real poignancy in here, and to do that the illustrator's chosen to use cut out vignettes here on the left hand side before panning that out to a full single spread on the right. What's that making us think about? How is that making us feel? And look at the choice of the words here. We've got honour in the first sentence. What does it tell us about the boy's feelings towards his grandfather? Why do you think the boat needs to be fit for a long journey? And think about that final sentence. It's been separated away on that second half of the spread, one they had planned together. Why is that impactful? What effect does that final sentence and separating that off have on us as readers? Nicola, this is Ocean Meets Sky by the Fan Brothers. We'll give you a copy of the slide handout for the session so that you've got the titles of all of these, but it's fantastic. We've also got some teaching notes for this on the free resources part of our website. Jane, that whole poignancy of they didn't get to go together. They planned it, but they didn't get to go together. Yeah, there's that real poignancy in that last sentence. Have a look at the vignettes of him. What do we notice about him when he's building the boat? Have a look at his size on the page compared to the props. Yeah, Leah definitely showing how hard he's worked to build it and the length of time. Again, cutting away to those vignettes really does show us how the time is passing. Let's have a look at him again on the next spread. Boat building was hard work. Finn took a short nap below decks. When he awoke, he felt the boat rocking gently beneath him. Now, we've got some lovely juxtaposition in these vignettes here. Look at that choice to share a close-up large vignette of him fast asleep and cocooned by that inside shell of the boat. And then look at the contrast in the next image. What do you notice about that contrast from being so deeply asleep to alert and awake? Here we've got that shift of perspective. We're seeing his reaction, but we're not actually seeing what he sees. What do we think he's looking out at? What clues are there in the text on this page and what might have come before? What do you think he's going to see when we turn the page? Claire, very pragmatic there, Claire. Probably wouldn't actually be a seaworthy vessel, but he's now at sea. Now, if we know that, what might that be? Oh, Leah's saying the boat's like a metaphor for his grandfather. It's protective, it's safe for him. James saying he's excited. Has the tide come in? Because what would it mean if the tide came in? Nicola's gone straight back to that whale. Is he going to see the whale when he turns the page? Well, let's have a look and see. This is what he sees here. The journey had begun. Think about what impact that page turn has on you and what causes that impact of the page turn. It might be that we've gone from some small vignettes to something so big and vast, a full bleed double page spread. Claire noticing how small he is. Look at the scale, look at the perspective on the page. He's at the very beginning of this journey as well. He's tight on the left hand side in the bottom corner. So we've got a sense of how far he's got to go, both literally and metaphorically as well. And you might then think about that impact of that very short exclamation there. What's the effect of making that sentence an exclamation and such a short one? How does it make us feel like about the journey he's about to go on? And how does that juxtapose with maybe how the illustration's making you feel? Leah's talking about how it brings joy to a story that seems quite sad and melancholic. We understand why he's doing it. Nicola's talking about the grandfather's sea stories he shared with his grandson. They're immortalised in the clouds like Grandad is. And James saying the image from the previous page, that cutout of the boat in the picture. Yeah. Claire looking at the excitement, the adventure that we've got ahead of us. Brilliant. Now, what we need to do is to give that time to children of all ages, because as our project teachers picked out, children weren't used to being given that focused time to read images. They wanted to flick through the book and get to the story that was in the words. So when we did start this work with some children, they found it really hard to unpick those images. And what lots of our teachers noted was that they were very surprised that it was their more able readers that were making the most simplistic contents, and that surprised them and highlighted the need for much more regular work in discussing illustrations across Key Stage 2. When you're looking at your developing readers, look at those that offer challenge thematically, that allow them to deal with deeper issues in very accessible ways. Emily Hayworth's Booth, The King Who Banned the Dark, is a fantastic book to use to think about the privilege and power and how we deal with privilege and power. You might look at things like The Little Island, that I think Anderson Press described this as their Brexit book. It's not really. It's about living in a community and what we need to do to community build together. You might look at things like Chris Naylor Ballesteros' The Suitcase, which is a deceptively simple story, but with so many layers of depth that children can discuss. And again, look for your quality of representation in characters, in settings, in themes, as Farrah's talked about before. So we'll finish off with some picture books for independent readers. What are the highest levels of challenge and where do we want to get children to? Well, it's about that continued development of visual literacy skills. It's about giving children a real ability to explore some very complex themes in a meaningful way and developing their critical literacy skills to engage in higher order questioning. This is where you really want to be looking at those greater depth skills for reading that is also going to make impact on their writing, so that you're really looking at author intent, the judicious choices of language, the text layout, the punctuation, and also the intent that the illustrator has as well. How are they making those meaningful choices in their composition, their layout, their use of colour and line? So for our final book today, we're going to look at The Journey by Francesca Sanna. Now, if you are a Power of Reading school, you might have already seen this book or used this book. We've seen this book recommended in all sorts of ways. Some in it was awarded a 3 to 7 book prize in one book prize category. I would say this is definitely one for your 7 to 11-year-olds. There's a lot of complexity in here that will only be brought out if the children have the right life experience to give to the reading experience as well. So you might start by asking the children what the title means to you, what the connections they make with the word journey, but then you also might look at honing in on the journey that might be taking place in this book and what we can infer about the journey from what we see in the illustration. Francesca Sanna's style, very different, quite complex, very graphic, but lots of detail in it that we can encourage children to really dig into. Look at the height of the illustration on the page. Look at what lies at the top. Look at all of the things that build up before that. What might that be speaking to us about? What might it be saying to us? And again, never skip the end papers. Think about why the illustrator has composed the end papers in this way. What sense is it going to give us about the journey the characters are about to undertake? What additional thoughts might we have about that journey from what's been depicted there? And again, this is a brilliant one for layering up with looking at viewfinders so that children can really focus in and hone in on small details like that brick wall with the barbed wire. As we go to the inside title page, we might think about why the illustrator has chosen this particular vignette here. Where's our attention focused, and what does the depiction of the characters that we see here make us think or feel about them, and how is this different from what we saw on the front cover? We might think again, like with If All the World, why she's placed the image of the bird there and what a bird in particular might signify. Here's the first spread from this book. I live with my family in a city close to the sea. Every summer we used to spend many weekends at the beach, but we never go there anymore because last year our lives changed forever. Now, there's so much we can learn about the characters and their situation from the words and then the images. We might look at specific words like we used to spend many weekends, but we never go there anymore. That's a really judicious choice to start that sentence with the word but. And then that ending, last year, our lives changed forever. Look at how the illustration picks up on that. Look at how the mother's gaze goes up and out. She's not seeing what's coming before them, or maybe she's seeing what's coming towards us here. Get children's attention looking at the placement, the direction and gaze of the characters. Why do you think the author illustrator's chosen to do that? Look really significantly here at the colour palette. What do you notice about the colour of the sea? What might that signify? What do you notice about the sandcastles that the dad and the daughter are building? Why might they have represented that so intricately there? The war began. Every day bad things started happening around us, and soon there was nothing but chaos. Think about the impact of that page turn. Think about what's making you think or feel that way. How long do you think they'd spent sitting there making those sandcastles, and now this has just been smashed to pieces? Look at the direction of the journey on this page. In lots of the books we've seen so far, we're very naturally driven towards the page turn, towards the right-hand side of the spread. Here, we're drawn towards the left. We're going the wrong way in this story. And here we can say, and one day, the war took my father. Now here we could draw the children's attention to the objects depicted on the page. Think about what's particularly significant about them. Why do you think the illustrator has chosen those? Already, have a look at this. Can you see those red glasses? Where have you seen those red glasses before? This is where we need to do some flipping back, some flipping forward, thinking about where those glasses came. Why are they so significant on this spread? And you might think about the impact this colour palette chosen by the author has and how it adds to the storytelling. Now, when you're looking at those picture books to support older readers, think back to those comments that we saw before. We want to pick those picture books that they're engaging, that aren't too easy, that have those layers of depth and meaning. We want those really challenging books like The Undefeated that Farrah showed before, like The Dam, like Varmints, books that enable children to put their knowledge of the real world into the context of their responses to illustration. You're also, what you want to think about is where all of those reading skills and strategies are built in. Throughout those activities where we were unpicking the picture books together, we've been covering those full range of reading skills. We've been predicting, we've been close reading, we've been questioning and rereading and empathizing. We've been thinking aloud and summarizing. We've been noting the structure of the text as we look at where sentences are placed on pages. So you're teaching all of the core reading skills and strategies you need to do in this way. And it's really important, particularly now that we're teaching children to analyze the way images make meanings. It's the multi-literacies that our children need to access the world now, that's full of Twitter memes, that's full of fake news. And if we look at that in more depth, what we need to be doing is teaching news literacy, which includes visual literacy, across the curriculum in ways that make that easy for teachers. If we can do this with picture books, those skills are transferable to films, to photographs, to all other kinds of visual analysis. So as we finish the session here, think about, are you using picture books regularly in your teaching? What do they bring to the children's learning? Are you giving that time for close reading of illustrations as text when you're using multimodal text like that? And are you teaching them the language and the skills of reading illustrations? We have got lots more resources on the Power of Pictures website. They're all fully accessible via the main page of our website. You've got supporting text that you can work on. As I said before, when we choose books for the Power of Pictures project, we make 3 teaching sequences to show how to use these across the primary years. We've also got videos of all the author illustrators introducing themselves, reading books aloud, teaching you how to draw characters, and teaching you about their writing process. So as we draw the session to a close, please do put into the chat or unmute and ask Farrah or I any final questions. And do remember, we've got a whole range of training, free resources, book lists on our website if you want to look at any more of the kinds of quality text that we've talked about today. Please do visit there, go to the free resources section, go to our training session if you want any more training. Please do keep in contact with us as well via our website or via social media, but please do ask us any final questions in reflection to any of what you've heard this afternoon.
Thank you so much, Charlotte. Thank you. Honestly, a wonderful afternoon exploring those books with you, and so much that we've been able to take out of that session. I really hope colleagues have found that a really useful couple of hours. We are just slightly over time, and I know time is really precious for colleagues. I'm going to post in the chat a link to our feedback form. It's really important, colleagues, as you know, that we take on your feedback to look at how we can use what we've learned today and help to develop that into future sessions. If there's things that you want us to work on further, please do let us know. It'd be great to move forward with this thinking further. Thank you so much to Charlotte and Farrah for being with us this afternoon. A huge amount you've crammed into 2 hours, so well done, both of you. I really hope colleagues have found that a useful afternoon. Ruth, is there anything that you want to add just before we close the session at all?
Oh, sorry to Jane, who's now got a big book list. Sorry for your wallet, Jane.
I just wanted to say really quickly, and just did, but I was on mute, which seems to be like a modern malaise, that all of this links so well to some of the things that we've done in the network already around book choice, around reflecting realities, but hearing it from you just brings it all to life, puts the passion there. Listening to Farrah talking about the research around reflecting realities is always really inspiring, and then all those wonderful practical ideas. We will be revisiting this through the network, but I just think it's just perfectly placed with what we've already been doing. I've also had a lot more to say than that, but we've run out of time, and that's good. I can't find a collective noun for readers, so I might run a little competition with the group to come up with the best one, and I'll send it to you when we decide. Thanks. But that's it from me. Thank you so much.
Thanks, Ruth.
Thank you. Colleagues, if you have got any questions or queries, please do feel free to hang on and ask ask away to Charlotte and Farrah. I'm sure we've got a couple of minutes just to wait on now. But I will say thank you. Thank you for joining us this afternoon. As I say, I hope you found it useful and look forward to seeing you again in the after half term for our next session. So thank you, colleagues. Bye-bye.
Take care, everybody.
Thanks, everyone. Take care. Thanks very much for all your purposeful comments in the chat.